Most of the world believed that when the West unleashed the largest sanctions campaign in modern history, Russia's economy would collapse within months. Experts predicted empty shelves, industrial shutdowns, mass unemployment, and a shrinking military capacity. Some even said the Russian economy would be pushed back decades. But something unexpected happened. Instead of crumbling, Russia found new buyers, new routes, new financial systems, and new methods to keep money, energy, and resources flowing. The global economy quietly adapted around the sanctions and, in many cases, even strengthened the very networks that the sanctions were meant to destroy. The mystery is simple. How does a sanctioned nation become wealthier, more militarized, and more globally embedded than before the sanctions began? The real answer lies far deeper than politics. It lies in the invisible financial systems, shadow trade networks, and geopolitical incentives that operate beneath public narratives. To understand how Russia defies sanctions today, we must turn back decades long before the 2022 invasion of Ukraine. Because Russia didn't improvise its survival strategy in a few months. It spent years quietly building it. After the collapse of the Soviet Union in 19, the newly formed Russian Federation inherited almost everything except economic stability. Hyperinflation destroyed savings. Entire industries collapsed. Western economists rushed in with prescriptions of privatization, rapid liberalization, and market shock therapy. The result was catastrophic for citizens but extremely valuable for a small group of emerging oil. They acquired oil fields, metal industries, gas pipelines, shipping fleets, and banks for pennies on the dollar. This created the first seeds of Russia's modern power. A resource empire in private hands, integrated deeply into global markets. Western corporations, banks, and governments became dependent on Russian oil, gas, aluminum, fertilizer, uranium, and rare minerals. That dependency, built quietly over decades, would later become Russia's greatest geopolitical weapon. By the early 2000s, under Vladimir Putin's consolidation of power, the state regained control over strategic sectors. Gazprom, Rosneft, Rostec, and dozens of other mega companies became tools not only for domestic control, but also for international influence. Putin understood something simple. The world runs on energy, and Russia supplies it cheaply, reliably, and in massive quantities. This meant that even if political tensions rose, the global economy would still need Russian resources, and therefore Russia would always have leverage. The next major step occurred after 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea and the first wave of Western sanctions hit. While these sanctions were significant, they exposed something crucial. The West needed Russia more than it admitted. Russia immediately restructured its economy. It boosted domestic manufacturing, increased agricultural output, redirected energy shipments toward Asia, accumulated massive gold reserves, and began reducing dependence on Western financial infrastructure like SWIFT. The Kremlin realized sanctions were not a one-time event. They were the new geopolitical weapon of the century. So Russia built defenses long before the next attack. This brings us to 2022. When the full-scale invasion of Ukraine began, the West responded with sanctions of unprecedented size. Central bank assets were frozen. Banks were cut off from SWIFT. Over 1,000 foreign companies suspended operations. Russian billionaires were targeted. Russian oil faced price caps. Russian imports were blocked. Many believed the economy would collapse entirely by winter. But instead of collapsing, Russia pivoted, quietly, strategically, and shockingly efficiently. RS? How? First, Russia created a network of shadow tankers, a massive fleet of old, untraceable, and poorly insured ships that carry oil around the world without revealing their origin. These ships turn off transponders, transfer oil at sea, forge paperwork, and blend Russian oil with other grades. India, China, the UAE, Malaysia, Singapore, and dozens of intermediaries became critical stopovers. Russia's oil exports didn't fall, they rose. Even with price caps, Russia found buyers willing to pay higher prices because global energy demand is endless. Oil, unlike political alliances, always finds a home. Second, Russia exploited the weakness of sanction enforcement. Sanctions work only if all nations follow them equally. But global politics is not equal. Many countries don't want to anger Russia. Others want cheap energy. Others simply want profit. This creates a global gray zone where banned products keep moving through friendly intermediaries. Turkey became a huge hub for re-exporting Western goods into Russia. Kazakhstan, Armenia, Georgia, and Serbia became channels for electronics, cars, machinery, and microchips. China multiplied its exports of industrial equipment. As a result, Russia's imports actually recovered to pre-war levels within a year just through different routes. Third, Russia rebuilt its financial system. When major banks were cut off from SWIFT, Russia connected to China. SACEPS system expanded its domestic payment infrastructure and increased settlements using the Chinese yuan. In 2021, the yuan barely existed inside Russia's financial system. By 2024, it overtook the dollar as Russia's most traded currency. This shift became one of the biggest monetary realignments of the century. Russia also expanded gold reserves, used offshore intermediaries, created parallel mechanisms to bypass Western compliance, and embraced digital ruble pilots to strengthen domestic control. The sanctions didn't destroy Russia's financial system, they forced it to evolve. Fourth, Russia increased military production by shifting the entire economy into wartime mode. Contrary to expectations, sanctions failed to block key components. Microchips still entered through third countries. Toulouse goods continued to flow. Factories expanded, defense budgets skyrocketed. Skilled labor moved from private industries to weapons manufacturing. Russia turned isolation into mobilization and war into economic stimulus. This is why, despite forecasts, Russia posted GDP growth higher than many European countries. A war economy, fueled by resource exports and global loopholes, became surprisingly resilient. But the most surprising factor in Russia's strength is geopolitical. The world is no longer unipolar. Sanctions rely on the idea that one power or alliance can isolate a country. But today, economic power is distributed among many players: India, Gulf states, Southeast Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Many of these nations do not want to sacrifice their interests for Western strategies. This fragmentation makes sanctions weaker, not because the policies are flawed, but because the global system has too many alternative routes. Russia understood this far earlier than the West. It built partnerships with nations that value cheap energy and strategic neutrality. It offered discounts, investment opportunities, military cooperation, and political support. In return, these nations provided markets, technology, and diplomatic cover. The sanctions created a new world, not where Russia is isolated, but where Russia is integrated into a parallel economic system that functions outside Western control. Even more surprisingly, sanction pressure accelerated the de-dollarization process. As Russia began trading more in yuan, rupees, dirhams, and local currencies, many other nations followed the trend. The global financial system became more diversified, and the dollar's dominance faced new structural challenges. This is not because the dollar is weak, it remains extremely strong, but because global alternatives are growing. Sanctions, intended to weaken Russia, also weakened the idea of a single unified financial world. However, the story is not as simple as Russia winning and sanctions failing. The reality is more complicated and far more dangerous. Russia is simultaneously stronger in some areas and weaker in others. Consumers face higher prices. Certain industries struggle. Skilled labor shortages rise. Long-term technology access remains limited. And yet, none of these weaknesses are enough to collapse the system, because global demand keeps Russia alive. This brings us to the deeper truth. Sanctions cannot destroy a resource superpower when the world still depends on its resources. Oil, gas, metals, fertilizers, uranium, timber. Russia controls too much that the world needs every single day. And because the global economy never stops moving, someone, somewhere, will always trade. Markets find loopholes. Traders find routes. Corporations find incentives. Money finds pathways. Every time. This is why, decades from now, historians may look back and conclude that sanctions did not isolate Russia. They reorganized the global trading system around it. Shadow fleets expanded. Middlemen countries grew wealthier. Non-Western financial systems strengthened. China became Russia's central economic lifeline. India became a major refining hub for Russian oil that is later sold ironically back to Western countries. Gulf nations became financial intermediaries. A new global system emerged, less centralized, less controlled, and far more unpredictable. We must now ask, what happens next? The answer depends on how the world responds. If sanctions continue without a coordinated global enforcement system, they will push more nations toward alternative trade routes. If the West tries to tighten restrictions, Russia will simply innovate again, finding new networks of smugglers, shippers, bankers, and brokers. The war economy may overheat, but as long as money flows in from energy exports, Russia can continue building weapons, funding the government, and sustaining public stability. And even if Europe reduces its dependence on Russian resources, other countries will increase theirs. The world is too unequal, too divided, and too driven by economic survival for sanctions to work as intended. The deeper truth is uncomfortable. Russia gets stronger because the global economy quietly benefits from its survival. Cheap oil reduces inflation, minerals stabilize supply chains. Fertilizers prevent global food shortages. Uranium fuels nuclear power. In the shadows of geopolitics lies a simple but brutal economic reality. Nations act not according to morality but according to necessity. Globalization has created too many alternative pathways, too many interests, and too many dependencies. Second, sanctions often create the very underground systems they are meant to destroy. Shadow fleets, smuggling routes, financial bypass networks, offshore intermediaries. These structures don't disappear, they become stronger. Sanctions reveal that the West no longer has complete control over global finance. The emergence of alternate systems reflects a new era, one where economic influence is fragmented, competitive, and unpredictable. The warning, however, is clear. The longer nations rely on informal, unregulated, shadow financial systems, the more unstable the global economy becomes. The next crisis may not begin in Wall Street or Frankfurt but in the quiet corners of the shadow world where oil tankers move invisibly. Currencies shift through offshore accounts, and deals are made with no oversight. If you want to understand the forces shaping money, war, and global power, this is the reality you must confront. The world is no longer governed by official institutions alone. It is shaped by hidden networks, alternative systems, and the constant battle between control and survival. To explore these systems, to uncover the truth the headlines never show, and to understand how global power really works, ascribe to the dark economy. Because here, we reveal the financial forces that shape nations, reshape conflicts, and quietly control the modern world.